I wanted to do a follow-up, as I did at the end of the year and every subsequent show. I want to continue to do this because I want to follow up on how we've been manipulated, and building off of the Christmas show. I wanted to give some examples of what the press and the elitists have done in basically getting us to believe in something that's not true. And one of those things is our basic form of government. We are supposed to be a Republican form of government, not a democracy. And as a matter of fact, American republicanism is very unique to just a Republican form of government. Most people can look up the dictionary and say, well, a Republican form of government is a representative form of government. But what we did that was completely different, and it was brought to us by the Connecticut Compromise, or Roger Sherman, when he proposed that the states, being sovereigns, had representation as well. And then they basically duplicated that so that the states would have an equal form of Republican form of government with a bicameral legislation. What that would do is it would create counties in each state. Most all the states had counties anyway, if one has parishes. But what ended up going down is that the counties were sovereigns, and representation was based on the county lines. It was not based on the state lines and the population. So each county had its own representative for its member in the Senate, and the way that was done, it was different between state to state, but most states were actually appointing by their commissioners, their senator, and then the county had representation of their rep, or I should say their House of Representative, or what we call a representative in our state legislature, like Representative Shea or Representative McCassell and so forth. Those representatives were elected by those people in that county. They didn't smear county lines. And could you imagine all of a sudden the federal government starting to smear state lines and saying, you know what, because Wyoming doesn't have enough people, we're going to make it bigger so that it consumes some of the other states around it, so that it has the appropriate amount, so then we can have the real apportionment for the people for Wyoming. No, they don't do it that way. That's why Wyoming is guaranteed one representative and 2 senators. It's not by population. It is by the sub-element or the sovereign underneath the government itself. And for the federal government, the states are the sovereigns, and in the states, the counties are sovereign. And that's why we subdivided states by counties. And so these sub-elements are a part of our republicanism and not a part of democracy. And the way we're doing it today, it is a democratic form of government, because they are actually smearing. And as a matter of fact, in lots of states, even this one, you'll find that there is one representative for 5 counties. Or in California, there's 10 counties that have 1 senator and 2 representatives. And that is not representative for those counties. Those counties have completely lost their voice and representation in their legislative body of government. The other thing I wanted to bring up was secularism, as far as what we truly believe is the truth, and how we've been manipulated into believing that America is a secular type of country. And the reality of secularism is, when they used the term secular, that meant non-denominational back in their day. They didn't believe in, godlessness. All of those men were very godly men, and we were a Christian nation, but we were a nation of an amalgamation of different churches. And so instead of dictating which church would be the established church, it was a non-denominational government as far as the federal government, or what they use the term secular. So when you hear them using the term secular, that did not mean that they were godless. That means that they were non-denominational. And so there's plenty of evidence. And if you go back into the radio shows that I've done before, where I've had Mark Urbach on, where we got into the details of this, how this truly is a Christian nation, but we've lost that because we've allowed the progressives to obfuscate that. That is the reality. And that goes down to the same thing of whether you can have religious freedom in America. And I've had this question out there for lots of people that truly believe that there is this thing called religious freedom. That's hogwash. Religious freedom is not something within the Constitution. You have a right for religious expression, and you have a right for speech and assembly, but nowhere in the Constitution does it say religious freedom. Every state in the Union, like I already said, had its own established church, and most every state in the Union also suppressed or banned very specific churches. As a matter of fact, the Jewish faith was not allowed to be practiced in America until the 1800s in most of the states. There was only two states, I believe it was Maryland and Rhode Island, I think were the two states that allowed the Jews to actually openly practice. Muslims and Hindu, they were not allowed to practice in America for over a century. And so this concept of religious freedom is baked in by seculars to try to create this stigma that, the framers were all okay with Satan worshiping. Any kind of religion, as long as it's a religion, is good. And that's not true. And if you read the Northwest Ordinance, they actually get into how important using the Bible in education was a part of that. And that was a part of the law of the land when they established the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. So I don't want to digress too much into the secularism, but the whole thing is that when they use the term secularism, it does not mean anything to what the progressives have labeled it today, being godless. Secularism in their day was a non-denominational faith of Christianity. So anyway, the consequences of this religious freedom is really a fallacy. And so I will get into the Establishment Clause next week and what these churches were doing and how the federal government has literally violated the Establishment Clause within the United States Constitution.